Revolution knows no compromise. Revolution overturns and destroys everything that gets in its way.
You are here with us on Breakthrough News, and this is the Freedom Side. I am one of your co-hosts here, as always, alongside my intrepid co-host, Rania Khalek. Rania, as always, great to be alongside with you.
Great to be alongside you, Eugene.
Excellent. Well, good that we're both happy to be here with each other, and we're both very happy to be here with all of you out there in viewer land, or I guess maybe listener land if you're, doing some chores or something as we start the show here. But shout out to all of you. Great to have you with us. Great show for you, as always, going all around the world, but of course focusing very heavily on the 1-year anniversary of the genocide in Gaza that has been, just passed several days ago, but generally is being much discussed this week. So we'll be discussing various different aspects of that, from the ongoing struggle and solidarity with the Palestinian people to the broader geopolitical situation and what we can expect in the near future. So big shout out to everyone, by the way, who is watching us on Free Speech TV. Big shout out to the whole FSTV team for making it possible for us to be here with you. And if you're watching on YouTube, just want to give you a reminder now, right now, would be a great time for you to go ahead and hit the subscribe button, then hit the bell so that you can get the alerts for the things that you've subscribed to, so that you don't have to work very hard to see all the fantastic content that we have coming out here from Breakthrough News, including, among other things, Dispatches with Rania Khalek. Rania, are there other things you would like or feel our viewers should know before we get into the show?
Yes, Eugene, I want to remind everybody who's watching to make sure you smash that like button. It helps boost the algorithm. God, I'll never get tired of that. And on top of that, you can become a Breakthrough News member and help support Breakthrough News by going to patreon.com/Breakthrough News. And for as little as $5 a month, you can access exclusive content, as well as exclusive merch. And you, most importantly, more than the access to cool things like that mug that Eugene's holding up, you will be supporting independent media that doesn't lie to you about a genocide and doesn't push pro-imperialist warmongering talking points. You'll never get that here at Breakthrough News. Quite the opposite. So I highly encourage you to help us sustain ourselves and grow by becoming a member at patreon.com/Breakthrough News.
Yes, absolutely. And big shout out to everybody who is viewing this, who's already a patron. We want to also, of course, give you big thanks for your patronage so far. It's made a huge difference and everything we've been able to do here in Breakthrough News, our ability to grow and our ability to move forward. And of course, big thanks to everyone who's done something, as all of you have, to spread the word, even if you don't have the means to donate. Really appreciate everyone. So we want to just jump right into it here today, and we want to turn to our first story, to the ongoing efforts on U.S. campuses to divest from the war machine that is backing the ongoing genocide in Gaza and, in many ways, many other wars as well. It is ongoing in many places, including the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, MIT. And we are very, very honored to be joined here as we continue the show to talk more about what's happening there by Alejandro Tañón, an undergrad at MIT and an organizer with the MIT Coalition Against Apartheid. Alejandro, thank you so much for being with us.
Hi, thank you for having me. Really excited to be here today.
Well, look, we're excited to have you, and a very, very interesting story from some of the things that you all have had ongoing. And maybe let's just start there. Everyone knows MIT, big technical school, so I'm sure there's a lot of interaction with the military-industrial complex. But you all recently had a pretty big victory regarding at least one aspect of that collaboration with the seed fund with Lockheed Martin. Tell us about that and what took place.
Yeah, of course. So the specific thing was the Israel Lockheed Martin Seed Fund, which was this fund that allowed for partnerships between professors and faculty with Israeli facilities of Lockheed Martin in Israel to develop projects and other things that Lockheed Martin was using. And Lockheed Martin is one of the biggest, if not the biggest, weapons manufacturer in the world. and are very deeply complicit in the genocide in Palestine. So throughout all of last year, our main campaign was around this specific fund and calling for MIT to end the fund. So throughout the year, we had a lot of different protests, different demonstrations, and we've been able to see the growth of the movement very, very dramatically throughout this last year. Like, we go back to a year ago, October, we had this kind of like cloud of fear and confusion around all those students. They saw what was happening, saw it was important, but kind of didn't know how to plug in. And we made a clear demand around this one specific target at MIT. It was very clear how it was tied to the genocide. And throughout like different actions, we saw the university start feeling the pressure of the movement and start trying to repress the students in different ways. But every single time they tried, the students just came back stronger. For example, in November 9, we had a peaceful sit-in in the main lobby at MIT called Lobby 7. Students were just sitting down with protesting, but like just doing work, standing around, and then we had some Zionist interference, some Zionist counter-protesters, and then the MIT administration threatened to suspend the students that were part of the sit-in. And then after this, our numbers doubled the amount of people joined the sit-in. We got people from the community doing a rally outside of MIT calling for the university to stop repressing the students. So we have seen how the increase of our pressure makes the university kind of feel weak and try to do something to stop it. But then once they see that that's not working, that ends up giving fire to the movement. They have no other choice but to cancel the programs and heed to our demands. And that's what we've seen throughout this last year. And we, based on our efforts and our increased pressure, we saw they canceled this one program, and we've moved on to our other demands for this next year.
I mean, I think this is a really incredible development, especially because it's so often with this issue, it seems like you're up against so much. It's just a tsunami of attacks, legal attacks, physical attacks, intimidation tactics, you know? And so to see a win like this is really exciting, but I'm sure that it was, I mean, you just described some of it, but I'm sure there was a lot of hardship throughout. And I think there's a lot of, students who are working hard on campus, or if they're not, they want to, but they feel frightened because of the attacks they saw all of last semester. So I think it's really important for people to see a win like this. I'm just curious if you can speak to some of those hardships I mentioned that you might have experienced at MIT, and why you think despite those obstacles, which can feel really scary at times, whether it's to your livelihood or your future or your own ability to even attend an academic institution, why you think it's worth it to risk all those things to push for something like this.
Yeah, definitely. No, yeah, there's been a lot of different avenues the university has tried to repress or like suppress the movement. We saw throughout the last year, they first started creating some sort of like arbitrary rules around protesting, trying to like change what was an allowed protest, what was not. Then started trying to like discipline specific students that they saw being involved in the movement, and also suspension of clubs, student organizations. But in all these instances, the students kept going forward. They knew what their call was, and I think this comes from like students being able to understand the immense intensity of the struggle we're part of right now. They see the genocide in Gaza. They see day by day people dying and the suffering, and they see how their institutions are complicit. Places like MIT, they claim to be this force of good in the world, leading change to make the world a better place. But then you go into it and you see how they're deeply tied with the military. If you go back to the anti-Vietnam War movement, students were protesting against war research at MIT. And you look at it now, you see something very similar. MIT has a couple of projects, research projects, that are in direct partnership with the Israeli Ministry of Defense. These are projects that are paid for by the United States Department of Defense, and the Israeli Ministry of Defense is the one that selects which projects get the funding. So we see this connection between MIT, the military in the United States, and Israel, and is very, very deeply tied. About 30% of our research at MIT is funded by the DoD. So students can deeply understand like why they need to act. They see their institutions being deeply tied to this, and they know that their voice is the one that can make that stop. The voice and the push of the student movement is the only one that can cut these ties.
No, I think that's a critically important point. And I mean, you look at the nature of what's happening here, and MIT as an institution, I think, is just so well known around the world as sort of like the pinnacle of, sort of engineering and technological education. And as you were just referencing, has been so tightly tied into the military industrial complex. So, I do wonder what is next from here, because I'm sure there's quite a bit more complicity in a number of different fronts that you all are looking at. So what are some of the continued demands and goals that you're trying to bring to the table, and the connections that you're trying to highlight between MIT, the genocide, and the military-industrial complex more generally?
Yeah, of course. That's really exciting. We have a new campaign starting this second year, the MIT arms embargo. So as I referenced before, MIT has this direct ties to the Israeli Ministry of Defense. They have couple of research projects. For example, there's one with autonomous robotic swarms, which is algorithms used for drones. And this project, in partnership with the Israeli Ministry of Defense, we can see like how it can be used for this like killer drones going into Palestine. And students understand the severity of this and like how deep these ties are connected. So first part of this MIT arms embargo is stopping arms research. We don't want any arms research at MIT, especially with the Ministry of Defense of Israel. But that's not where it stops. We also have other collaborations with companies that are complicit. For example, we have partnership with Elbit, which is Israel's biggest weapons manufacturer. And there's also other collaborations with companies like Maersk, which is currently shipping weapons to the occupation. So our new demands, like starting this new semester, are like no arms research with the Ministry of Israel Defense, no collaborations with Elbit, no arms manufacturing, also no collaboration with Maersk, no weapons shipments from MIT. So that has been our focus for this next year, and students are motivated. They saw our wins from the previous year with the Ministry of Israel Lockheed Martin seed fund, and they now see these other ties that are so deep, and the pressure is still up. Students are motivated. Our movement is even stronger now, given the new students that have joined the movement, new students at MIT, new students that are seeing the escalations that Israel is doing in the region, and have decided that they can't stand with this.
Well, I have to say, this is really very interesting signal work here, and one of a number of seemingly accumulating victories on American college campuses divesting from the war machine. Alejandro, you are with the MIT Coalition Against Apartheid. We really appreciate you joining us here on the show and helping let us know about what's going on there.
Of course. Thank you.
Rania, you're muted.
I mean, it has to happen at least once a show. It's really good to see a victory amidst so much horror and devastation. And I think we're going to move to one of those areas of escalating horror and devastation, and that is what's happening in Lebanon. So let's just go ahead to the next guest. I want to introduce Hala Jaber. She is an award-winning Beirut-based journalist and author of the book Hezbollah, Born with a Vengeance. Hala, welcome to the Freedom Side.
Good evening, everybody. Hi, Rania. Nice to be invited.
Oh, no, we might be having a bit of a... You're cutting a little bit, Hala. I assume it's probably a Wi-Fi issue. And you're frozen. Yep. Let's see if we can rectify that. I'm wondering if we can get you on your 4G. Sometimes that works better. But actually now nope, you're freezing again. I feel like maybe can we see if Hala... Let's try to get her on a 4G. This is a Lebanon thing. Common Lebanon issue, guys. But it's important to talk about what's happening in Lebanon. So I hope we can get Hala back with a good connection, because Israel just escalated a couple hours ago, Eugene, in a really horrific way. They, for the third time, bombed central Beirut, and they hit 2 residential buildings, destroying one of them completely. There are at least 11 dead, 48 injuries, according to the Lebanese Ministry of Health. And again, this is an area of central Beirut, which is considered or was considered a safe area. A lot of the rest of Beirut is housing displaced people right now because in the southern area of Beirut called Dahieh, the Israelis have been just taking out one building after another with these wild airstrikes, mostly using bunker buster bombs supplied to them by the U.S. in a very densely populated area. So many people have fled the southern suburb of Beirut to other areas, including central Beirut, where, from what I understand, at least one displaced family was killed in these latest airstrikes. So basically, they're widening their circle of targets, and it's terrifying everybody. They're trying to make all of Beirut unsafe. And the area that was hit is I think like a 10-minute drive, maybe even less from where I live in Beirut. So this entire year, it's just always felt like Israel was getting closer and closer and closer in terms of its atrocities, like a storm, like a scary, scary storm, actually way worse than a storm. And now to just see it reaching, I mean, this is what I had nightmares about. It's a nightmare to have it reach where you live, and just destroying lives constantly. It's absolutely horrific.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And unfortunately, Rania, they've just updated the death toll. At least 18 have been wounded, have been killed, and 92 wounded. And of course, that's at least because they're still continuing the ongoing efforts, the civil defense there to uncover people who may be under the rubble. So could get worse, unfortunately. And also a school in central Gaza hit today, 28 people killed. So the level of carnage is quite high in terms of what's taking place there. And I think you can just see it's, as you pointed out, it's a completely and totally indiscriminate. I mean, there really is no well, actually, I'm going to remember what I was going to say. I was going to say there's no rhyme or reason to it because it's indiscriminate. There actually is rhyme or reason to it. They are trying to kill as many people indiscriminately as they possibly can. And I think we should also remember when we think about this, Rania, because, of course, the Israelis always say, well, we're going after somebody, some evil person or whatever. But what's important to remember, I think, is that the story that came out from 972 magazine many, many months ago about how they're using the AI to do a lot of these bombings, you know what I'm saying, and all the different things. But the basic point is the article laid out that they're fully aware of all collateral damage before they do anything. So, like, no matter how many civilians die, they decided that was totally fine with them. So you can't really say that these are targeted strikes going after one person. I mean, they're deliberately massacring anyone in any area at any time that they want to, and then coming up with these retrospective things. But it's not as if it's like, oh, we know one person's there and we hit him and then like, oops, we're sorry, there were like 30 other people who were killed. It's like, oh yeah, we're gonna kill maybe 100 people, but like, let's just go ahead and do it. So they're fully aware of all of it. But I think we do have Hala back with us now. Yes.
There she is. Hala.
Hi, I can hear you.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, connection is better. I'm glad we solved that. And it's so good to see your face. I hope you are safe. I know you're coming to us from Beirut, where Eugene and I were just talking about this latest horrific airstrike where they targeted 2 residential buildings, completely destroying one of them in central Beirut. Before we get into some deeper questions, can you just update us on what's going on? Rumors are that they targeted in this strike for assassination Wafid Safa, which is Hezbollah's liaison and coordinations unit head, who is a political figure. I will remind people, not a military figure. So please, I'll let you take it from there.
Yes, exactly. I mean, there's been 18 people killed. That's the latest update, and 97 injured. I was just downstairs because my cousin's fiance, a very young girl, literally, I was called by my cousin that they live in the neighborhood there, and she was terrified, in shock. She was safe, but they needed to move. So we were giving her keys for another apartment to do so. I mean, they're targeting. It's like they've run out of their so-called bank of targets, and now it's anyone is game, basically. I mean, there's no point, there's no reason why they would target a politician, because that's what he is at the end of the day. He's an official. He's not a military man. He's not one of the intelligence corps. He's, he should not be on. No one should be on their list, in effect, but definitely not Wafik Safa. That's the excuse. irrespective of the excuse, Rania, as you know, the two areas today that were targeted, one is called Nuwairi and the other one is Basta, the upper Basta. These are really heavily populated civilian areas or neighborhoods. And the last time they did Beirut, they actually used a drone missile, which went straight into one apartment, although the building was a 7th-floor apartment. Today, they didn't. One of the buildings is a 4th-floor apartment, which was totally destroyed, and the other one is heavily damaged. So they literally went for the entire building, even though there are civilians and families, residents living in that building. Whether Wafiq Safar is there or not is not the point anymore. To kill, they're killing at random. Earlier today, they targeted 3 buildings in the Bekaa Valley. These were residential buildings again, and there were like quite a number of casualties between were killed and those that were injured. So Israel is just basically, excuse me, having a free hand in Lebanon. And the worst part is no one in the West is actually even attempting to stop it. You know, they broadcast what they want to do. They say we want to invade. They say we want to take this country, that country, and the other. They say we're going to target these hit lists. You know, they put lead target, and then they cry that they're the victims. I mean, I really can't understand anymore how this is happening.
You know, one of the factors that I think, you know, for those of us who are our viewers in the West that they get is, you know, Israel is constantly claiming and the U.S. media is constantly repeating that, you know, they're degrading Hezbollah, they're destroying Hezbollah, they're assassinating all these leaders to destroy their infrastructure. And I mean, I just wonder what you think about that, because I think obviously the Israelis have had a long-term policy of extermination against the leaders of any resistance group of any sort. Is this kind of like terroristic bombing something that can destroy or uproot Hezbollah as a movement, as an idea moving forward?
Not at all. And we saw that attempt even in Gaza when they said, you know, they want to eradicate or eliminate Hamas. I mean, Hezbollah is a cause. It's not about a man or a leadership. It's an entire cause. It's a population. It's a Shiite community. It's about the South in its entirety. So even if they eliminate leadership, you know, they thought that by eliminating Sayyid Hassan Nasrallah and the top hierarchy, that they will actually, you know, that the organization will actually crumble. It will stop being. But they're making mistakes every single time. It's not mistakes that they don't know about. It's mistakes that they know and they keep on repeating because that's their excuse. That's their justification because they really want to go on a rampant and kill. So eliminating the leadership does not end or seize the organization. Neither does it end or seize the cause, which is the people, which is their freedom, which is the reality that they want to live on their own territory, on their own land, whether Israel wants it or not. So by eliminating leadership, new leadership are fill in the gap, basically, be it from the military side or the intelligence side or the leadership. So far, okay, Hezbollah has not actually appointed or anointed its new general secretary, and it will do so in due time. But that does not cease. And let's say they eliminate the entire hierarchy of Hezbollah. That will be refilled, you know, within days or within weeks. It will be refilled. And even if they did that, that does not end the fact that, you know, there are people fighting for their freedom, for their right to exist, for Israel to stop occupying, and for Israel actually to stop aggressing, because that's the most important thing. Israel is the bully in the region, and all it does is aggress and then cry wolf. And this has become a norm for it. But no, you cannot kill an ideology, you cannot kill a cause, and you cannot kill an entire population or an entire community which runs in the millions. So I don't think it's going to work. We know it's work. They want to work, but they go ahead and do it anyway.
So, Hala, I want to ask you about the sort of internal Lebanese dynamics that are taking place in the context of what the U.S. is doing on the political side. So while Israel is trying to degrade Hezbollah militarily, the U.S. is trying to weaken Hezbollah politically by pressuring the government to appoint a president who is to the U.S.'s liking, who then they would like to basically squeeze Hezbollah out of the political field. And we know Hezbollah was elected in 2022 again to serve in parliament. They're a part of the largest parliamentary bloc. And before I get your answer on that, because a part of this is also trying to exacerbate sectarian tensions in the U.S. with the same typical characters we're used to, We're used to the US doing this. We're used to the Israelis doing this. But Benjamin Netanyahu, a couple days ago, actually put out a video addressed to the Lebanese, but of course in English, so it was really meant for the West. And I just want to show a clip from that video and then get your reaction to the idea in it. Can we please play that clip?
You deserve to restore Lebanon to its days of tranquility. You deserve a Lebanon that is different. One country, one flag, one people. Don't let these terrorists destroy your future any more than they've already done. Stand up and take your country back. You have an opportunity to save Lebanon before it falls into the abyss of a long war that will lead to destruction and suffering like we see in Gaza. It doesn't have to be that way.
God, I should have put a trigger warning on that because I feel like traumatized just seeing this man's face at this point. But, he essentially was calling for the Lebanese to start either kill each other or they will turn Lebanon into Gaza. So I'm just curious, your response to these clear attempts to try to reignite civil unrest in Lebanon along sectarian lines.
Rania thing would apply actually ignite a civil unrest, because that would weaken Hezbollah, which is concentrating now all its all its fighting in the south, and will not be able to so is the assumption anyway, that will not be able to handle an internal war. Either way, whether Hezbollah is able to handle that or not is not the point. It's the fact that you have a so-called prime minister of so-called entity, right, that is actually telling the Lebanese what they should or shouldn't do. I mean, how dare he? The audacity of that is just staggering. He should be looking internally to clean his own house. And since when does Netanyahu lecture the Lebanese? Since when does Netanyahu actually even give a broadcast to the Lebanese? This is the first time around throughout the history we've not had an Israeli leader address the Lebanese, or anyone for that matter. He's emboldened by the assassination of Hezbollah, and he assumes that he can do this, and that obviously he's also speaking to a particular camp in Lebanon that you and I know, that are very happy to hear him say that would be happier even, if Hezbollah is beating on the field, and if they make peace with Israel tomorrow. And we call them the far-right Zionists that are in the country, and they can be even more hardliners than the actual Zionists themselves. So this address is meant for them. And yes, he is attempting to start a civil war in Lebanon. And on top of that, he's pretending that he wants peace in Lebanon, or he wants peace anywhere for that matter, when in fact they want a piece of Lebanon. Smotrich was out a couple of days ago on some interview with a French TV. Literally, he spelled it out. I mean, they're telling the world what they want to do. They're announcing their terrorist acts. They're announcing their hit lists. They're announcing the fact that they want to that they're expansionists and they want to take this country and that country. They're announcing everything, and then they come and try and preach to us that they want peace. If you want peace, you should cease from bombing Lebanon. What was the bombing tonight about? Assuming you have this one target, you bring down 2 buildings and kill over 20 civilians and nearly 100 civilians to get your one target. That is not going to resolve any issue. If anything, people are now more drawn towards Hezbollah. People are now going to fight even more, and people will never accept peace with Israel. And definitely, they're not going to accept the Americans or the Israelis imposing a new president. We all know what happened when they did that in 1982. And this could just be another repeat of that. There is no way that the Lebanese, or a huge sector of the Lebanese, is going to accept the Americans to dictate who becomes president. And really, when you have a full-fledged war going on in the country, with the possibility of a full-fledged invasion, because it looks like that's what he wants to do, this is not the time to be discussing whether Lebanon has or hasn't a president, or whether one needs to assign a president now. So that's not going to wash with many, but it will wash with a certain sector, as you know.
I'm glad you raised this issue of a hit list as well, because Rania brought to my attention an interesting graphic that I think was on Channel 12, maybe Channel 14, Israeli News. Hopefully we can maybe pull this graphic
Channel
up, but sort
14.
of the targets of people they want to kill. And there's a lot of notable things here, but the thing that really struck me is one of the images is Grand Ayatollah Sistani from Iraq, maybe some people might argue the top leader of all Shia in the world. And I just wonder what you think this says about the sort of broader Israeli goal and campaign here, that in addition to, the leaders of the Houthis, Hamas, and others, they've targeted one of the top Shia clerics here on such a prominent media channel in Israel.
I mean, let's put it out there. They're unhinged. That's one. Second, if they touch Ayatollah Sistani, you have no idea what the ripple effect of that would be. And this time, I'm serious when we're saying this. I know sometimes people say, if something happens, it's going to cause this, it's going to trigger that. On this occasion, if Ayatollah Sistani is touched, right, together with Sayyid Khamenei, these are the two most revered, if you want, and the most senior Shiite clerics in the world. And Sistani definitely is sometimes said to be the bigger name. That does not then just end with Iraq responding or Lebanon responding, the Shiites in Iraq, or the Shiites in Lebanon. You're talking the tens of millions of Shiites around the world that will not accept it, because for them, these are the scholars that they refer to. It's like literally you saying that we're going to kill the Pope, okay? That's how serious this is. It's an offense to say it religiously, to make such an announcement. And it's actually quite, it goes against every international law in the world that you're actually broadcasting a hit list of senior clerics that are leaders in their own countries, of sovereign countries, and you dare say that. And still, like I said at the beginning of this interview, the world pats Israel on the back and says Israel has the right to defend itself. I'm sorry, Israel here is the aggressor. And I'll tell you what, Lebanon has the right to defend itself by the same token. So does Iraq, so does Iran, so does Yemen, so does Syria. These are the axes at the moment that are being attacked by Israel, and each and every one of them has the same exact right to defend itself like Israel. This thing about Israel's right to self, that doesn't wash anymore. If that's where they want to go, if they actually assassinate Sistani, there will be a major war in the region. And mark my words, that would be the case.
Well, speaking of major wars in the region, there's another element of this escalation that everybody's waiting for, and that is Israel's response to Iran's retaliation from last week, when Iran sent 180 ballistic missiles at Israel and rained down. I mean, it was pretty incredible to see, because we've never seen missiles like that rain down on Tel Aviv, but we saw it this time. And the Israelis for the last week have been promising all kinds of things. They've been promising to punish Iran, to perhaps strike oil facilities, to perhaps even strike their nuclear facilities. They've been coordinating with the Americans. You've covered so many wars across the region, Hala. Both, the dirty wars and the, wars between armies. What do you see happening here? Do you think this is going to lead to a tit for tat that becomes regular between the Israelis and Iran? Like, where does this end? What happens next?
Well, Iran has made it very clear that, let's make something clear, because I think it's important for the audience to know. When Iran fired those 180 missiles, it did not fire them out of a vacuum. It was in response to Israeli attacks inside of Iran when they assassinated the political leader of Hamas, Ismail Haniyeh, and obviously for assassinating the General Secretary of Lebanon, Sayyid Hassan Nasrallah, and for attacks that they've carried out against Iran over a period of time. So the particular attack was in response. It was a reprisal. It was a response. It was a reaction. And they have the right to do just like Israel does. Now Israel is going to attack Iran again. And it pretends it's attacking Iran again because Iran attacked it. But that's not the case. So if Israel wants to do this, Iran has made it very, very clear that on this occasion, if they thought the 180 was very small or didn't do enough, then this time they will rain down on Israel a lot more than they did there. So far, Iran has not even been using its, if you want, its latest missiles or weaponry that can do a lot more damage. Iran also, when it fired 180, it was very, very careful to fire them against military targets, not civilian targets. Unlike Israel, again, if you look at the Axis attacks over the last year, they have continuously been targeting military installations or military targets, objectives. Whereas on the Israeli side, they just target civilians. They had, so the higher moral ground is with the Axis. Now, like I said, Iran said they will rain down missiles on Israel like no tomorrow. And I think on this occasion, there won't be red lines. Again, it depends how far Israel's attack against Iran is. They're talking about oil installments, although I think the Americans are trying to say no to that. There was a point when talking about the nuclear facilities of Iran, or at least and again, that could cause huge disaster. So we'll see how far they want to go, and I think it depends on how far Israel does for Iran's response to be. If Israel really goes somewhere where it shouldn't, then Iran is not going to hold back on this time. On the other hand, there may be attempts by the West, that we don't know about. I'm hoping that's the case, whereby they're saying to Israel, okay, you need to do something, or you feel like you need to do something, minimize it and get it over with, and let's close this chapter. Because if this continues to go, like you said, Rania, it will become a tit for tat. I think this time, Sayyid Khamenei is taking the lead on this. The reprisal for Ismail Haniyeh, as you know, should have come many months, much earlier. He was very clear about, if you want, the directive that he gave, that something like this that happened in their territory, under their protection, has to be responded to. The new president opted because he was convinced that the Americans were telling him that, look, Israel is not going to attack again, and there's going to be a ceasefire in Gaza, and everything is going to become, nice and daisy, basically. So he went for that. But after Sayyid Nasrallah and after another attack on Iran, so I think Sayyid Khamenei used his executive powers, which he has, but unlike others, he's not a dictator, so he doesn't like to impose them. But on this occasion, he went above everybody and said, we need to respond. And he's taking the lead now by saying, should Israel dare to re-attack Iran, then the reprisal is going to be much, much harder. So yes, like you said, we could see this escalating. I hope not for the region. But then again, we're going to wait and see. I think today Netanyahu was having a phone call with Biden to discuss how far they go in their attack. I mean, whether he heeds or not is another story. As you know, the man is unhinged. Sorry, but he's a lunatic on the loose, basically. And no one seems able to stop him or to tackle him. And he's just doing what he wants.
Mm-hmm. Well, Hala, we really appreciate you joining us here. Hopefully everyone is going to go read your book if they haven't already, Hezbollah, Born with a Vengeance. But thanks for giving us some of your time here in the Freedom Side.
Thank you very much for having me, and good evening to you too. Rania, I'll catch you later. Thank you.
Yes, stay safe. Well, Hala is one of the best. If you are not following her, you should be following her on Twitter. I believe her handle is just her name, @Hala Jaber. She's like a veteran war correspondent, really smart. And she is back in Beirut. I mean, bravely covering the day-to-day, the hour by hour. It's not an easy place to be operating out of right now. So thank you to her. And also, I got to say, Eugene, we can talk more about this later, but the point she was making at the end is an important one in the sense that not responding to Israel at this point emboldens them. It emboldens this lunatic Netanyahu. And I think that's the conclusion that everybody in the resistance action in the region has come to after the assassination of Hezbollah's Secretary General Hassan Nasrallah. And then just like the insane unleashing of hell on Lebanon is that, and then the violence with Iran. I think it's just, we can't not respond to these people. At this point, it seems Israel really only understands force.
No, I think that's certainly a very good point, and to keep going on this exact same point and many other points in relationship to them, we're very happy to be joined on the show by Leanne Fulahan, who is the education director at the People's Forum, also an editor at 1804 Books and an organizer with the Shut It Down for Palestine Coalition. Leanne, thanks so much for being back with us.
It's great to be back on.
Well, it's great to have you with us. I mean, I guess there's so many places we could start here. I mean, we're essentially 1 year into the ongoing genocide. I guess maybe my first question, and this is kind of a broad question, so sorry about that ahead of time, but I mean, here we are 1 year later. One of the worst massacres of humans, I think, certainly many of us have ever seen, and I think will go down in history. But nonetheless, the Palestinian people have not run up the white flag of surrender in Gaza. And I just wonder your reflections on that, because I have to say it's really amazing to see that despite this huge amount of violence Israel has directed towards Gaza and also the West Bank, of course, Palestinians have remained steadfast.
Absolutely. I mean, the steadfastness of the Palestinian people, of the Lebanese people, of people who are directly confronting the military arm of U.S. imperialism and its puppet states is just incredible, completely incredible. And I think it's the admiration for this, the appreciation for this, and the reality of what it means to be an everyday person living in Gaza right now, or living in Palestine, or living in Lebanon, is reflected in the commitment of the mass movement for Palestine that has continued mobilizing and continued organizing now a year later. If you paid attention this past weekend, even October 5 was incredible. I counted over 58 actions in North America on October 5. There was more on October 6, more on October 7, and that's just what I was able to count. No one person can even have a full view of what's going on across the world, and that's just North America. And that's now 1 year later. I mean, if we think back to mass movements throughout history, it's rare for them to be able to last this long and to also be able to continue growing. I mean, there's people at these mobilizations this past weekend who it's their first time going out to a protest. And so it speaks to the fact that the ongoing U.S. assault on the Palestinian people, whether it's being executed by the Israelis or not, the ongoing U.S. assault in particular is still reaching the U.S. population in a broader and broader way. There's more and more people who are changing their opinion and waking up to the reality of what the United States is doing to people across the world, and making connections also to the hardships that they face due to the U.S. capitalist system here inside the United States. So I think it's really incredible. I think that it is a reflection of the fact that people are ready to stand up against imperialism. People are ready to fight for a different world and are not going to accept the reality that we live in today.
Leanne, that's so important to remember, but I also want to, because I think that this is an important issue to deal with, and that is a kind of level of defeatism that starts to take over when it's been a lengthy time period like this. I mean, some people might say, okay, that's great that the movement's still going, but it's been a year. The public polling shows that the population of the U.S. is against this genocide. They're even increasingly for an arms embargo at Israel. That's not reflected in our leadership. It seems like no matter what the UN says and does, whatever they accuse Israel of doing, which they're absolutely doing on video, there don't seem to be any consequences because of the cover Israel gets from the US. And now Israel is expanding its genocide into Lebanon, trying to start a war with Iran. The Israelis seem to some degree, it starts to feel like the Israelis are unstoppable. I don't think they're unstoppable, but I do see that sentiment taking hold in people. It's like we're in the streets and it hasn't changed. It only seems to be escalating. So how do you address that sentiment that it's been a year and this is still going on? Does it even matter for us to still be in the streets if it hasn't done anything so far?
I'm so glad you raised that, Rania, because this is the key question in front of us right now. And the way we answer that question determines everything. I mean, if we look at the situation a year later and we say nothing we do matters because the genocide is still continuing, I think we're missing a major part of the reality here, which is that the genocide is being carried out by the ruling classes of the United States and Israel. They respond to money. They respond to profit. They respond to the profit being made off of the brutal deaths and massacre and devastation of the Palestinian people, of the Lebanese people. This system that we're in right now has no interest in meeting the demands of the majority of their own population. And I think what we've managed to do in this year is actually wake the world up to that fact. I mean, the United States doesn't just fight wars and commit massacres and push its agenda forward just with a military arm. They invest just as much, if not more, in media disinformation, in propaganda, in ideological manufactured consent. I mean, the kind of status quo consent for the ongoing occupation and slower, I wouldn't say slow, but slower ethnic cleansing and genocide of the Palestinian people up until last year was very effective. I mean, most people in the United States didn't even know what was going on in Palestine, let alone have a strong opinion about it. What we've managed to do this year, and I say we in the broadest sense possible, I mean, it's really just everyday people in their millions at this point who have all contributed to reversing this manufactured consent for U.S. imperialist agenda in the Middle East region. And what they've done is taken the mask off of the situation. A lot of people are realizing now, we've been protesting every day for a year. We've been to DC multiple times in hundreds of thousands. We have been writing letters. We have been doing disruptive actions. We have been organizing in every sector of society. And still this government doesn't change their course. They're willing to sacrifice an entire presidential campaign to the political crisis that's been generated by this movement rather than change course. It really shows how the system is organized and the way the system is organized to protect the profit of the very, very few and sacrifice not only the demands and the wishes of the population, but also the lives of thousands, hundreds of thousands, millions of people across the world. So this in and of itself is extremely important. And I think that's really important to raise to people when we say, well, nothing's changed. Actually, a lot has changed. There has been an irreversible change in public opinion and in public consciousness, not just on the matter of Palestine, but on who we are and what our role is in society. Our role isn't just to sit back and maybe vote every 4 years. Our role is to organize and start creating the conditions for an actual concrete change and transformation of our conditions. And the second thing that I would want to say is, we all feel some varying levels depending on who you are and how close or far or how much you are dealing with the situation, an incredible amount of loss and grief and horror. I mean, what is playing out in front of us is a nightmare. People are having trouble functioning, just having to witness this, let alone having to live it directly, especially if people have family in Lebanon or in Palestine or in Gaza. But at the same time, a year later, Israel has not won yet. The United States has not won yet. They have not achieved their goals. They keep trying to escape the trap that they have created for themselves by expanding the war, by creating consensus around new targets among the military and political establishments of the United States and Israel. And they're just going to continue expanding the trap they've created for themselves. This is another thing that is very important to say. We don't have the luxury of feeling defeated or feeling despair while our people back home are still fighting, still struggling, and still surviving. We just can't. I mean, staying home at this point serves nobody except the White House and the Netanyahu regime. I mean, it really doesn't help anyone, but we together, collectively, we are able to overcome the feeling of horror of how this has unfolded over the past year and continue organizing, because although we've made a huge transformation, there's a lot more we can go. There's a lot farther distance we can go. And it's going to take us continuously growing the movement, continuously organizing, and not resting before it's over.
No, I think those points are extraordinarily well taken. And one of the things over the past year, Leanne, that I think is relevant last couple of minutes here is, people comparing it to Algeria. That was 7 years. Vietnam, that was 1954 to 1975. I was actually just reflecting the other day that, around the same time they hung Gabriel Prosser for Gabriel's Rebellion in Virginia, Nat Turner was actually born. He revolted 30 years after that, but it was 30 years after that slavery actually ended in the context of 180,000 black people taking up arms during the Civil War. So, it's an element of this. I think a year is a long time. And because we have this social media, which we've never had in the past, that is just mainlining this to us, it's hard to lose track of it. But, liberation struggles are protracted struggles. I'll just leave it there to give you the last word in the last couple of minutes.
That's absolutely right, Eugene. We have to put this in context. And we also need to be realistic about what is happening right now. The world's most advanced and powerful and wealthy militaries are all trained on the populations of Palestine and Lebanon who have been occupied and under siege and dealing with the effects of neocolonialism and direct colonialism. In the case of Palestine, the kind of brutal apartheid reality that people have been living under stalls people's ability to develop. People are resisting the world's greatest military powers with what they are able to develop under conditions of direct occupation. This is not insignificant. It's not going to be able to be won right away. We have to look at history to reinforce our own stamina for this, because it is going to be a long fight. Is it going to be the longest fight ever? No, because already so much has transformed over 1 year. But from a year ago until now, it's not just that the fight has continued, but also the entire world has shifted its eyes onto the Palestinian cause. Israel and the United States are more and more isolated. There's significant impacts on all fronts, including the geopolitical front and including the political front. So, things are changing rapidly, but we also have to be very serious about what's actually happening. This is asymmetrical warfare in its most extreme, and still the most amount of wealth and technological development in the world has not delivered a victory to the United States nor to Israel, and that is extremely important to remember. We can't forget that, and we have to hold on to that as we continue struggling in every front that we are in.
Absolutely. Well, among other things, you're an editor at 1804 Books. I think Trinity of Fundamentals, put out by 1804 Books from Wissam Rafidi, the former political prisoner in Palestine and ongoing struggler there, has a lot to tell us about steadfastness, struggle, and what we're going to need moving forward. Leanne Foulahan, as always, pleasure to have you here with us on the Freedom Side.
Always happy to be here. Thank you both.
Rania?
No, Leanne's points are really, really important, and yours as well, Eugene, because I think it can seem like so overwhelming. It's all, what's the point? It's still happening. And I get that feeling, but, you have to keep the historical context of liberation struggle in mind. And then also remember, if people can fight under the most dire of circumstances over there for their survival, we are in the belly of the beast. It's like the least you can do is show up in every way possible so those people can not be exterminated and so those people can be liberated, because it's our government that's causing all of it. And I'm constantly reminded of Vijay Prashad, Comrade Vijay Prashad. I'm going to plagiarize him. I like to plagiarize him. But he always tells that story about Ho Chi Minh. I think it was like a bunch of Italian communists went to go visit him at some point in North Vietnam. And they were just like, what can we do to help? What can we do to help? And he told them, go back to your countries and make revolution, because that's why this is happening, because your countries are like run by imperialists. So this is really important. This is where it's coming from, is the US. So if you're in the US or you're in a Western country, it's your duty to do everything in your power to show up in the streets, to organize, to be a part of other organizations, to give your money if you have it, to put a stop to these horrors from the imperial core.
No, very well taken point, and I really appreciate that point, and I'm sure Vijay is more than happy to have you plagiarize him at any time. I think I can speak for him there. We want to keep moving forward other aspects, and we've been sort of hitting this, moving through, but the role of Iran, the role they're playing and what we can expect next. And on that score and many others, we are very, very happy to be joined by Mazda Majidi, who's an organizer with the Answer Coalition. Mazda, as always, thanks for being with us.
Hi, Eugene. Thanks. Great to be here.
Well,
good work, by the way.
Oh, well, listen, I appreciate that. And we are very happy to have you here. One thing that we're hearing a lot, Mazda, is that the era of strategic patience in Iran has ended. And, it's a phrase I've heard a lot of different ways. And I'm curious, well, A, if you think that is even an accurate characterization of what we've been seeing here since the Iranian response to the Israeli attacks on them. But also, if you do think it's correct, what does it really mean in terms of Iran's posture in this current situation?
Well, I think when we think about the time when the U.S. under Trump assassinated General Qasem Soleimani, Iran's reaction was extremely measured, basically sending missiles, showing that they can do it, made sure that no one would get killed. And it was very limited. And in fact, the first time in April that Iran did send drones and missiles to Israel, that also was, very much calculated to minimize any real damage, just to make a statement. But I think, contrary to what we hear in the West about Iran being so aggressive and so forth, we know that Israel is the ultra aggressive state. And I think it has reached a point where Iran sees that even if all of its motivation is deterrence, it has to do something. And I think what happened last Friday, the Friday prayers on October 4th in Tehran, widely unreported or underreported in the West, but it's very, very significant, showing a different level of readiness for the struggle. As you know, Friday prayers happen in Tehran and other cities all the time. Ordinarily, it's not Khamenei, the leader, who leads the Friday prayers. In fact, the last time he had done it was in 2020, after the assassination of Soleimani. But this time, what was significant about it is that several days in advance, Khamenei and others announced that it would happen in Tehran, the Friday prayers. And not only that, they announced that there would be ceremonies in commemoration of Hezbollah leader Sayyid, I'm blanking on his name, which is shameful, Sayyid Hassan Nasrallah. And so therefore, it was several hours of the presence of Khamenei and many top leaders in Tehran at the Friday prayers. Now, a lot of people, myself included, thought that Israel would bomb Iran at that time, send missiles, and assassinate Khamenei. And in fact, social media was full of warnings that to people, don't go. If you go, you'll get killed in an Israeli bombing. And it seemed like a credible threat. And so what happened was that Khamenei, the 85-year-old leader, is there, standing there, showing that he's not afraid of Israel. He's there for hours. He's holding a rifle in his disabled hand, indicating, willingness to continue the struggle. And over 1 million people attended. They ignored all the warnings. They took the chance of getting killed in a potential Israeli bombing. And in fact, some people showed up the night before in hopes of getting in. The vast majority of the 1 million people couldn't even make it to the inside. They were in the areas around it. And, there were significant disruptions because of the number of people attending to the metro service and bus service, and traffic was stalled and everything. But basically, this was, I think, a signal of a different period, of a period in which the Islamic Republic of Iran and the people are declaring their readiness for struggle. It wasn't a show of power per se. It was a show of willingness to struggle and sacrifice and risk lives. It was very significant. And if we have time, we can talk about at least why I think Israel didn't do the missile attack. But I think it was a very significant thing. And I think Israel and the U.S. are watching as well.
So, Mazda, there's a couple of things I want to ask you about here. And this is a conversation I think a lot of people are having. I know we're talking about the strategic patience and how perhaps the the hesitancy to respond to Israel has resulted in Netanyahu feeling emboldened. I mean, we've seen that pattern. Some have said that this actually, you know, one of the mistakes that was made earlier this year was Hezbollah not responding strongly enough to Israel targeting the southern suburb of Beirut back in January to kill Hamas leader Salah el-Aruri. Their response was, I think, to like fire some missiles into northern Israeli military installations, and then to call it a day. And from then on, it became clearer and clearer to Israel that every time they crossed something that had been called a red line by the resistance axis, they weren't actually going to get the response that was promised. And I think Iran is maybe coming to that conclusion now. So I am curious if you think that's where the thinking might be at in terms of this is a lunatic country that is run by a Nazi-like figure at this point who will keep expanding, who will keep retaliating, who will keep making this a bigger war until he is deterred. And the only way to reestablish deterrence is to strike back. And that can't just be symbolic gestures and waiting till the time and place of our choosing, right? That's one. And I guess where I'm leading to with that is this making... Do you think the Iranian leadership reconsider their ideas around having nuclear weapons? Because we know that having nuclear weapons does act, in fact, as a deterrence. And for a long time, Iran has said, no, we won't have nuclear weapons. There's a fatwa against creating nuclear weapons. And now there are a lot of, there is a debate inside Iran that's become quite a public one about whether that's wise to continue on that path, given everything that's happened.
Rania, there's a lot to talk about there. One thing that I think that's very important for us who are in solidarity with the Palestinian people to realize is, as much as we would like to have a tit for tat between Hezbollah or Ansarullah or Hamas and Israel, I mean, the forces are asymmetrical. Israel is one of the most militaristic states in the world. It is supplied by the U.S. It is provided funding by the U.S. So it's not even just Israel. And so the problem is when you're fighting an enemy courageously and taking chances against an enemy that is far better armed and far stronger, I mean, your options are kind of limited. And as much as many of us would like to see tit for tat between Iran and Israel or Hezbollah and Israel, a lot of times that's not the reality on the ground. I think what has happened, and it's very significant, and even in the region, we couldn't say that 5 years ago, certainly not 10, 15 years ago, is that Iran now has the capability to inflict some damage on Israel. And that is very significant. But that's not to say that Iran has the equivalent military force to Israel. And then the other thing, which I believe all the forces of the axis of resistance are very conscious of, is the fact that Netanyahu in particular, and the Israeli ruling class broadly, have wanted for decades to make this a regional conflict because they want to pull the U.S. in. And this was true when Bush II was president and during Obama and Trump and so forth. Israel desperately wants to get the U.S. to invade Iran and occupy Iran. And of course, as you're dealing with forces that have far bigger military might than you do, you have to play your cards carefully. So yes, Rania, I do agree that Iran has reached a point of deciding that just exercising patience and self-restraint is not going to work. I know that many people were critical after Ismail Haniyeh was assassinated in Tehran, while Tehran kept saying that we are going to punish Israel, we are going to respond, but they hadn't done that till October 1st. But if you're part of the Iranian leadership, on the one hand, you want to show support and solidarity with the Palestinian resistance and the resistance to Zionism and imperialism in the region in general. But at the same time, you want to go only as far as to not make it inevitable for the U.S. to start bombing or possibly invading and occupying. So it is very difficult. And as much as those on the progressive side want to see Israel punished and the settler colonial state of Israel defeated, we also have to look at the real balance of forces, which, by the way, is moving in the direction of changing, because I think it is realistic to think that Israel is getting gradually weakened. That's not something that we're going to see Israel collapse tomorrow, but there are many signs that Israel is suffering consequences beyond the military consequences of the ongoing war.
Well, Mazda, I'm glad you raised the relationship of forces, because it seems the other aspect of what Iran is doing, and this goes back to President Raisi, is, very aggressively pushing the diplomatic course with various other Arab countries, particularly the Gulf Cooperation Council countries. We have, the president of Iran meeting with the foreign minister of Saudi Arabia. You've got the Iranian foreign minister meeting with Mohammed bin Salman and a number of top officials. You had the interesting sequence of events, I thought, that as soon as it seemed like Biden was like, okay, with the oil and gas bombing by Israel, the GCC comes out and says, we're totally neutral and we'll never allow them to use our territory to attack Iran, because obviously they don't want to lose their own oil and gas. But it seems that Iranian diplomacy has also taken a big step forward here in the last year, because they are trying to play on these contradictions that even these pro-U.S. entities like the Saudi Arabias of the world have their own self-interest that Iran is appealing to.
That's a major change. And I know all of us, the gut-wrenching scenes of Israeli genocide in Gaza makes it even difficult to follow the news. But if you think of the period prior to October 7, 2023, in fact, weeks before it, in September 23, Mohammed bin Salman was making statements saying it's only a matter of weeks, not even months, weeks, before we reach a diplomatic agreement with Israel. And these are states, including very specifically Saudi Arabia and the person of bin Salman, who were effectively for years and years lobbying the US to invade and bomb Iran. I mean, these countries were begging the US to do something about Iran. And now, as a result of the change in the balance of forces and as a result of the resistance of the Palestinians and their supporters across the Arab world, now we're seeing this, Eugene. That's very significant, that one reactionary monarchy in the Persian Gulf after another is making statements. Even Jordan is making a statement, no, we're not going to take part in any attacks on Iran. We're not going to let our soils be used. Now, of course, the U.S. has military bases on the soils of these countries, and it's not going to ask for any permission from them, which is another colonial aspect of U.S. military bases around the world. But the fact that this posturing has, from the point of essentially lobbying for the U.S. to invade Iran, to saying, no, we're neutral and we're not going to take part and we're not going to let our soil or airspace be used for attacking Iran, is an indication of how far things have moved as a result of resistance, despite the fact that resistance has given significant casualties, has given severe cost. But things are not the same in the region as they were a year before.
Mm-hmm. Well, okay, go ahead.
No, I'm good. I'm just, I just don't know what else to say anymore. Sorry, you guys. This is just me also being, no, listen, I mean, it's really hard to watch Lebanon just be destroyed. It's like I'm watching in real time, and it's horrible because, we watched it happen to Gaza for a year. And so everything we're seeing, we've already seen the script before, we know when Israel and the US say A, what's about to happen next. And it somehow makes it even more torturous in a way to know that when you hear A, B, and C from these imperialists, from these Zionists, it's like you see the writing on the wall, you know what's about to happen next. And, I think that's the fear of the entire resistance axis. That's what they've been trying to do all year, is to manage this, to pressure Israel to stop while preventing it from spreading. And it's just scary because it just keeps spreading. And it's like, there's no knowing when that stops. That's it. Yeah. That's all I want to say to the end of this conversation.
Rania, let me just add this, and it's as painful as it is. I mean, we have to recognize, as much as in the West we hear all the BS about proxy forces and Iran stooges and so forth. I mean, what we are witnessing is a significant level of sacrifice, of solidarity on the part of the people of Lebanon and around the world. I mean, Hezbollah had no direct interest in getting into a confrontation with Israel. I mean, there was nothing happening at that border. It was completely in solidarity on the part of the Lebanese people and the axis of resistance for Hezbollah to start sending rockets and missiles into northern Israel, or as far into Israel as it could. So, and we're seeing the same thing even in Iraq. We're seeing support in Iran, and we're seeing it, of course, even in Yemen. I think there's something to be said about that. And that is that when Israel started its recent round of genocide in Gaza, it is no longer true that the world stood by quietly. And in fact, a number of people stood up, showed solidarity, and they're paying the price for it. Also, I want to say there's a possibility, I don't want to make predictions, but across the Arab world, there's unrest. We know that in Egypt, we know that in Jordan. And so another unknown in this equation as the conflict continues is how much these right-wing governments of Arab states are going to be pressured or potentially even destabilized as a result of their own people wanting to rise up and show solidarity with Palestinians. So as painful as it is to watch these developments, there's positives in terms of solidarity and struggle as well.
No, certainly. The solidarity is important. And I'll also add to what you said. I actually do think Hezbollah may have had, an interest in involving itself in the sense of, one thing Hassan Nasrallah said in his first speech after October 7th was, yes, we're doing this to support Gaza, but also there's the whole issue of, if Gaza is destroyed, Lebanon is next. And that wasn't wrong, actually, because now Lebanon is next. And I think that's what we see. This is why Israel's so difficult to deal with, because there are no red lines anymore. And it's like something is always next. They haven't achieved their military objectives. And so they deal with that by expanding their war aims and destroying more. And we know ultimately that will weaken Israel. But man, in the process, how much is going to be destroyed? And that it's so unnecessary and completely preventable, but we have this international community that just sits on its hands, too cowardly to stand up to the Americans. And understandably so in a way, because, when you see what they do to Gaza, that's scary. You don't want that done to you. And the only forces that are willing to, put anything on the line are the weakest parts of the world the Yemenis, poorest country in the region. And look what they're willing to sacrifice, the Iraqis, the Iranians at this point, So it is interesting to see where everyone has fallen in the midst of a live streamed Holocaust. And I think one day when this is looked back on and written about, that will certainly be at the forefront of the history books.
Yeah, well, as Frederick Douglass said, without struggle, there is no progress. And he said that 3 years before the Civil War, so it gives you a sense of the context. Mazda Majidi with the Answer Coalition, as always, a pleasure to have you with us here in the Freedom Side. Thanks so much.
Thank you very much. It was great to be here.
Mm-hmm.
Well, Eugene, now
Yes?
we can talk a little bit about the military side of things, given our next guest, right?
I think we absolutely can. We are honored to be joined here by Jon Elmer, who is a contributing editor at the Electronic Intifada. Jon, thanks so much for being back with us.
Thanks for having me back again.
Well, I have to say, and thank you. It's really a pleasure. Here we are. At least according to the Israelis, which means that there may be more, 3 soldiers killed in this incursion into Jabalia camp. But, this is the area of North Gaza that they've been saying for 6 months now has been completely controlled by Israel. Hamas has been completely destroyed. And yet and still it seems that they're facing very stiff resistance from all the other resistance factions. Give us a sense of what you think the real balance of forces is here, because it really does seem that what Israel is saying just doesn't seem to ring true with what we keep hearing in terms of the attacks by the resistance on their forces.
Yeah, I mean, Israel said they had operational control over Jabalia in November. They went back in May and got smoked again in May. And then they went back in this weekend and they've been hit by 50 qualitative operations since Sunday. Another dozen today from all factions, but particularly from the Qassam brigades. The National Army is still able to meet the Israelis wherever they are. The division that went into Jabalia is the division that just left Rafah. When they left Rafah on the last days they were in Rafah, they got hit on the last days of a 5-month invasion of Rafah. They drive their tanks up, 20 miles up the desert and pull into Jabalia and get hit by 50 operations in 72 hours. So the resistance is fierce. It's still there. And Israel's targeting civilians. Their justification, the IDF told Army Radio that the reason for the invasion of Jabalia is because people were going to the shelters, the school shelters, and getting food stamps and getting humanitarian equipment and humanitarian aid. And they were coming there to report crime. So basic elementary governmental organization is the justification for Israel to evacuate the only 3 hospitals that are left at gunpoint, chasing people out with armed quadcopter drones, burning the warehouse with the flour, the last flour in the north. The people in the north have been living through brutal conditions for these last 12 months. Just unspeakable what we're witnessing. And, Rania said it too. It's just, you don't even know what to say at this point, other than to say that the people are resilient and courageous, and the way that they have met this invasion, this re-invasion for the 3rd time in Jabalia, is exactly the same way they've met every single incursion by the Israeli military in this 12 months. There's no sign of any kind of defeat or dismantling of any of these formations of Hamas, whether we're talking about sanitation workers, healthcare workers, teachers, the people that work in the ministries, the doctors. They've attempted to dismantle every single hospital in the Gaza Strip, all 36 of them, often multiple times, and they're going back into the north to do it again. Every time they do it, the Palestinians rebuild the hospital immediately. The second the Israelis are gone, the doctors themselves, the healthcare workers themselves are in there. The community is in there cleaning up the schools, cleaning up the hospitals, and making the situation livable again. The courage and resilience in the face of this just frankly disgusting operation by the Israelis, with no red lines, with a complete international community, not only acceptance, but $20 billion in U.S. aid that we just found out the other day. AP reported $20 billion in a year, which is 7 times more than the already grotesque amount of money that this rich country gets in military aid. While there's disasters all over the United States, while there's actual real humanitarian contributions that they could make worldwide, they choose to spend the money on bombs that are being dropped on civilians. They're just attacking civilians because they can't defeat the resistance.
Yeah, I want to ask you about the other front Israel has now escalated in, and that is the Lebanon front. Jon, the Israelis for about a week now, I think it's been a week, have been doing these ground incursions, these kind of raids where they sort of jump in a few hundred meters into Lebanon and take some photo ops, get into some fights with Hezbollah and then leave. I guess it seems like maybe they're testing the waters. They haven't really unleashed a ground invasion quite yet, but they seem to be definitely moving towards that direction. It stands to be seen when that will happen, but I'm curious if you can explain to us from the military side of things, because I think over the last 3 weeks since the pager attacks, Hezbollah has had to absorb one pretty devastating blow after another, the elimination of its entire senior military leadership, the assassination of Secretary General Hassan Nasrallah, which was a huge loss for not just the organization, but for the country of Lebanon. And also, of course, the now carpet bombing campaign across South Beirut and across the entirety of southern Lebanon that has created just severe displacement. Over 1.2 million people displaced from their homes. The attempts by the U.S. and Israel to ignite a civil war in Lebanon using the same sort of fascistic forces that they've used to do that in the past. This is really catastrophic nightmare scenario for Lebanon. And of course, it can still get worse. But with all that said, I think the mentality among people both against the resistance and even in some cases for the resistance, there's a sentiment of Hezbollah's really weakened. And this is a really scary moment for those in that community, in the resistance community, because they feel unprotected. That said, Hezbollah is still operating. Their command and control seems to be back in place. Tell us about that. Tell us about where Hezbollah's at and what their capabilities seem to be based on what we've witnessed over the past week of ground incursions, and also Hezbollah launching over 100 missiles every single day at Israel.
Yeah, there's no question losing that leadership was devastating. It's shocking. Nasrallah is a world historical figure. It's a devastating loss. But the assassination of senior echelon military commanders does not impact the readiness of the force on the ground to meet the ground invasion should it come. Now, we saw that on the first day when the 98th Division of the IDF, the division that had run roughshod over Gaza, attacking Shifa Hospital, creating mass graves outside Nasser Hospital in Khan Yunis, they put their toenails across the border and they get 9 dead and they pull back. And that's what we're seeing. And you described it correctly. They're tiptoeing across the border, taking some photos, planting a flag, and then quickly running away with it because the resistance is ready for this. And losing senior commanders, it hurts. There's no question about it. The institutional knowledge of that leadership tier, especially the founding generation. But Hezbollah is able to replace that leadership, and they're able to do that almost immediately. And there might be a period of time to get their footing in the senior echelons. But on the front lines, that's not how they fight. They're not waiting for a command from Beirut to defend the southern villages. They are trained in small unit tactics. They're able to fight disconnected from, should they be disconnected from that leadership, they're able to fight and defend their country. And they've prepared for this battle for 18 years. Losing, as devastating as it is, losing that leadership that they have lost, that doesn't affect the readiness of the organization to confront the invasion. And what we're seeing right now is Israel trying to shape the battlefield to see how they can move forward. And there's no reason at this point for Hezbollah to run forward and attack from their positions. Israel has to come up the hill. They have to come up the mountain. Sun Tzu said, don't fight uphill. And that's what the Israelis have to do. It's a serious battle if that's what they're willing to do. I think it won't go well for Israel, and it will be devastating for Lebanon. There's no question about that. And that's why Hezbollah plays it safe. Hezbollah has played it responsible. They're not trying to pull their country, who they are deeply embedded in that country, in the social fabric of that country. They're not just trying to throw that country into an open war just so that they can be seen to be retaliating instantly for a perceived transgression. You have to take the long view of this, and I think in the long view of this, Hezbollah will be fine. There's no question those were devastating losses. The loss of Nasrallah, to Hezbollah, to Lebanon, and to many cases to large parts of the world. Was a devastating loss, but that doesn't affect the readiness of an organization that for 18 years has been preparing for this exact moment. All of these Israeli divisions that are situated all across the border, they're all coming in through pathways that Hezbollah understands and are waiting for them, whether they're waiting for them at the 100-meter mark or the 1 kilometer mark. That's what time will tell. But there's no reason to believe that Hezbollah should run forward at the first sign of Israeli troops on the border. And that's why I think Israel's playing it very safe. And they're not saying that they're going to destroy Hezbollah. They're saying it's delimited, it's targeted, and they're trying to essentially change the equation, because Hezbollah has shrunk the country of Israel since October 8th, creating a de facto 30-kilometer buffer zone, security zone, as Israel would call it, inside Israel. Israel is a much smaller country today than it was on the 7th of October at 6:30 in the morning, when the Qassam brigades raided their military positions and humiliated and dismantled the Gaza division. It's a considerably smaller country that's in a lot poorer shape than it was a year ago, despite the brutal, unspeakable daily catastrophe that we're watching on civilian populations.
It brings me to another question, and maybe connecting the two fronts and, thinking about this sort of asymmetrical warfare, as everyone calls it, that I think is notable. But looking at what's happening in Gaza, what, is starting up and continuing in Lebanon, even the way Yemen is operating. I mean, so much of the propaganda is, well, these are all Iranian proxies, right? So like if Iran can't ship them 1 million bullets tomorrow or something, they'll all collapse. But it does seem that from my point of view, and I'm curious your thoughts on this, in Gaza, and I think this may be borne out in Lebanon, I think it's borne out in Yemen, that the sort of indigenous production, like the proliferation of knowledge of how to produce things as opposed to just shipping weapons and missiles, has introduced a very difficult factor for the Israelis to address, because I think they were hoping if we just siege them out and, we control Rafah and they can't sneak things through tunnels, they'll just immediately collapse. But that there was this resiliency built in many of these places, that they are, maybe not totally self-reliant, but significantly self-reliant, and thus able to last significantly longer than I think perhaps Israel or the U.S. had expected.
Yeah, I mean, in the case of Gaza, they're almost completely self-reliant. The Israeli 162nd Division that was in Rafah digging for tunnels along the Philadelphia corridor for 5 months, they said they didn't find a single active tunnel. If you look at the battle videos that Qassam puts out virtually every single day, you're not seeing imported, smuggled weaponry. You're seeing indigenously built weaponry. The case for Hezbollah is a little bit different. They have a land corridor between Iran that has been able to arm them, but that's the same situation. They're not proxies. They're not waiting for a call from Iran to do something or not do something. They're Iranian allies, and Iranians have shared military know-how with Hezbollah. Hezbollah has shared military know-how with the Iranians, and the same with the Palestinians. They've transferred knowledge. They've watched each other fight. Hezbollah and the Palestinians have been exchanging knowledge back 2 generations. So that's to call them proxies is a smear, and I think probably most of your viewers know that. It's a smear. The Israelis are far more of a proxy than Hezbollah is. Hezbollah is deeply integrated in their society. For sure, Lebanon is not as unified a body politic as Gaza, but once Lebanon is being defended by Hezbollah, I think you're going to find a unity that you might not see in these fearful moments before the invasion, when people are rightly afraid and should be afraid. What the record of Israel's crimes and the inability of the international community, quote unquote, to do anything about it is terrifying to people, and that's legitimate. But when it comes time, I think you're going to see resilience and courage step forward like we have in Gaza. And I think the Israelis are not so sure about this invasion of Lebanon. And I think if they had an ounce of self-preservation in their genocidal rampage that they're on, I think that they would be taking a second thought about an open war with Hezbollah. I think it's a war that they could lose very easily.
Well,
So,
oh,
and
go ahead, please.
well, real quick, I just have one last thing I want to ask you about, because we've kind of covered we've covered the Palestinian resistance and the shape there, and we've covered the Lebanese resistance and the shape there. And so, on the note of Israel, I mean, they have been fighting. They've been fighting, they've been carrying out a genocide, but they also have been fighting battles for the last year. And after a year of that, they're going into an even more difficult terrain, should they choose to really do their ground invasion in Lebanon. So I'm just curious, what shape is the Israeli military? And after all of this, I mean, these aren't immortal beings who don't die or who don't get tired, and they have been fighting in Gaza for the last year.
Yeah, well, the Israeli military says that they're battle hardened and they're the most trained division that they sent up there, the 98th Division. The 98th Division couldn't take Khan Yunis, a flat desert place. For 5 months. They fought in Khan Yunis and they couldn't take it. They couldn't find tunnels. They couldn't find Sinwar. They said Mohammed Daif was in Khan Yunis. They couldn't defeat the resistance in Khan Yunis on flat land that has been besieged for 18 years. And they send that division, after fighting in Gaza for 10 months, they send them up to the border and say that they're their most trained fighters. Just to think back to what Nasrallah said, like, you and whose army, Habibi? Like, is this the army you're sending? Because if it is, I would be, if I was Israel, I would be urging caution. And I don't know if that's what the Americans are doing. But they have considerably less hardware. Their tanks have been damaged. Their troops have been damaged. Their morale is probably high right now after the series of intelligence victories from their point of view. The morale may be high, but it won't take long to bring them down to earth. And I think the 98th Division that you're looking at on the B-roll on the screen there, they didn't get very far into Lebanon before their special forces unit took considerable casualties, and their medevac muster points are being targeted in Lebanon by Hezbollah, which they weren't in Gaza by the Palestinians. So that's an interesting thing to note, because it's difficult to imagine the way that they're going to handle mass casualties if it's under fire. I really think it's a scary moment for civilians in Lebanon. Nobody wants to see their country destroyed. Israel's on a genocidal rampage, but the resistance is a formidable force. And if Israel's really planning on a ground invasion, it's going to be a long and brutal battle that I don't see Israel doing well in that battle, to be totally honest.
No, I think it's a very well taken point, and I think that you are doing fantastic breakdowns on all of this and more on a very regular basis at the Electronic Intifada, so I hope everyone is checking that out. Jon Elmer, as always, thanks so much for joining us here on the Freedom Side.
Thanks for saying that. I appreciate it. Take care, guys.
Well, I mean, one thing I will say before we move on to our last topic here, Eugene, is that, this is really scary for civilians. Because Israel is on a genocidal rampage. And when you just think about the asymmetry, because people are right to use the word asymmetric. I mean, Lebanon doesn't have air defenses. And that's the issue, is Israel can just take out its anger on a completely naked civilian population because there are no air defenses. Whereas Israel has this like 3-layered air defense that the US pays for and supplies, and that AOC, again, I always want to remind people, AOC said, no, we'll definitely resupply the Iron Dome because that's defensive, not offensive. No. The Iron Dome helps Israel avoid consequences for genocide. That is what the Iron Dome does. So Israel gets this protection from anybody who's angry about its genocide hitting them back, while they can just bomb everybody around them who have no defenses, because there isn't a US like mommy state building them a dome of protection. So I just want to throw that out there every chance I can. AOC voted for the Iron Dome.
No, it's a good point. And I mean, it's completely absurd from her point of view. And before we move on, I will say, maybe this is an esoteric point, but it does speak to why the United States, worked to destroy the Soviet Union. You look at the war in Vietnam, which was certainly asymmetrical, the number of Vietnamese killed to Americans, significant. But you look at what happened during the Nixon administration when the Soviet Union brought in much more heavy surface-to-air missiles for, quote-unquote, North Vietnam, and they started to be able to shoot down the B-52s, and it had a big impact, and it had a big change in terms of the relationship of forces. And I think it just, I don't know where exactly I'm going with that, but maybe the broader point point I'm making here is this is why the United States goes to such great lengths to prevent any other nation from having the ability to develop itself, because they don't want anyone who could potentially check its power, or if they can check their power, who feel comfortable enough to provide their technology to countries like Lebanon or Venezuela or wherever they may be to protect themselves. And there's, very few people who will do that now, and none of them at the scale and the level of an economy of the Soviet Union, so they can't do it to the same degree. But maybe just a general point about sort of geopolitics and how those things play out. Before we close here, Rania, is a sad note to close on. I guess we're already closing on a relatively somber note, but I did want to note that Imam Mahdi Bray, one of the major leaders here over many, many decades of the struggle in solidarity with Palestine and the general struggle against the U.S., military machine in the Middle East and the broader struggle for civil rights here in the United States, a massive leader for the Muslim community here, has passed away this week. And I have had the opportunity to work with Mahdi since I was about 18 years old in Washington, D.C. At that time, he was the head of the Muslim American Society Freedom Foundation. But like me, from the state of Virginia, from the city of Norfolk, Virginia, he moved to Washington, D.C. to be a part of the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee and to work in the civil rights struggle of Black people. And he never turned around from that moment on and worked on almost every single human rights struggle. And that's why you can see so many organizations, so many individuals have been expressing their dismay at the loss this week, because he really was such a giant. And even recently in the past several years, Mahdi unfortunately suffered a stroke. But despite that, he was at every single demonstration for Palestine over the past year that I went to and saw in Washington, D.C. No matter what sort of accommodations he needed, no matter how difficult I know it must have been for him, it was just absolutely critically important that he be there to stand with the people of Palestine, with the people of the Middle East. I mean, he was totally indefatigable in his level of commitment to the broader struggle. He played a huge role, in the state of Virginia and around the country of bridging the African American community as an African American Muslim, the many millions of African Americans who've converted to Islam, to bridging the African American community and other more immigrant-based communities from the Arab world, from South Asia, who also shared the Islamic faith, and bringing people together after 9/11, especially around a vision of civil rights that drew from his own history of the civil rights movement, that drew from the history of so many of the movements around the world coming from the Arab and Muslim community, to bring them together into one stream, along with people from totally different, every faith, every community, atheists, Baptists, whatever you may say, communists, capitalists, everybody, to talk about the need to stand up to what the Bush administration was doing and what the Obama administration did after it, what the Trump administration did after it, and what the Biden administration did after that. So someone who is so widely respected in so many different fronts, a major force in bringing the Muslim community into the political scene in the United States, especially in the state of Virginia, but in many other places around the country, and making many of these issues felt not just on the street, but also at the ballot box. A father, of course. I could go on and on and on, and there's so many things I could say. A mentor to so many people. I think there are so many of us all around the country who, as younger activists, looked up to him as somebody who had lived a very strong, principled life, who just never wavered. And on almost any issue, he was there. I have to say, every time I saw Mahdi for the past year, he always used to say to me, I hope you see me. I'm retweeting your tweets. I'm retweeting your tweets, and it was no matter what it was, any issue that involved peace and justice around the world, he was like one of the number one people. He was on it. So I'm telling you, even someone who he had limited sight at the end, limited mobility, he was so plugged in to everything that was happening and had been doing so much for so long. And I think we have a clip here of Mahdi speaking at an event in 2014, actually, the Gaza war that was happening then, a rally that we had out in front of the White House in Lafayette Park.
My dear brothers and sisters, let me just say from the offset, some people are a little upset. They said, be careful, don't criticize the president. You may not get invited to the White House. You may not get an invitation to go have dinner at the White House. But let me tell you something. I don't care if I never go to the White House. If a Palestinian if a Palestinian can't live in safe and dignity and liberty in their house. I don't care. I don't care. You can't buy my dignity for some rice and lamb and some hummus. No. Just because you're at the table doesn't mean you're a diner. You might be a waiter without a menu.
And that was Imam Mahdi Bray in 2014. I have to tell you, that's not an empty boast. He was someone who was courted by presidents, by senators, by Congress people because of his role as a leader in the Black community here in the United States and also in the Muslim community in the intersection of those two. So Imam Mahdi Bray, of course, we're sending all of our love to your family as they go through this difficult time, and we say rest in power to really one of the great leaders here, the anti-war struggle, the peace and justice struggle in the United States.
Yeah, may he rest in power, and just that was a nice takedown right there. I like that. There's some people who need to hear those words. Who love to have that seat at the table, even if they're the waiter.
That's right. Very sadly, we know who some of them are. I'll let you know. We're not going to call names right now. We're going to let that one slide, but we'll come back to them. You know who you are. Well, Rania, that'll bring us to the end of the show here today. Of course, big thanks to all of our guests. Big thanks to all of our viewers. Anything you want to leave our viewers with, Rania, as we get out of here?
Yes, of course. I want to remind everybody to make sure you smash that like button. It helps boost us in the... It helps boost us in the algorithm. Moreover, you can help support independent media. You can help support Breakthrough News by becoming a member at patreon.com/Breakthrough News. As little as $5 a month, you'll get access to exclusive content and merch. But most importantly, you will be helping us grow so we can keep bringing you the anti-imperialist coverage that you love so much.
Absolutely. And shout out to all our existing patrons. Well, on behalf of myself, on behalf of Rania, whole Breakthrough News team, thanks for being with us, and we will see you next time.